With a bit more cloud around on Sunday, but the sunshine does make a return for Monday and Tuesday, and with the wind swinging around to the south, the temperatures will be rising too, perhaps into the mid to upper teens by midweek.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome, I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV, radio and online. We'll be reacting to the speech that we are just about to hear from Boris Johnson. We'll be taking the temperature on his political prospects, and we'll be digging deep into the prospects for peace in Ukraine. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Simon Pusey.
Thanks, Alistair. It's just gone midday. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The Ukrainian prosecutor's office says 112 children have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. In the east, the governor of Luhansk says a humanitarian corridor is being opened for residents trying to evacuate the region. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for face-to-face talks with his Russian counterpart, telling Vladimir Putin it's time for comprehensive and meaningful negotiations.
I want everyone to hear me now, especially in Moscow. The time has come for a meeting. It is time to talk. The time has come to restore territorial integrity and justice for Ukraine. Otherwise, Russia's losses will be such that it will take several generations to recover.
Volodymyr Zelensky there. Meanwhile, more than 8,500 visas have been granted under the UK's family scheme for Ukrainians. The UN Refugee Agency says over 3 million people have now fled their homes, crossing into neighbouring countries. GB News reporter Rosie Wright has the latest from Hungary.
This is Budapest Keleti station. Hundreds of refugees already today, women, children, arriving through here off platform 6, get to this humanitarian centre, and there's information about tickets they can get. Any Ukrainian citizen arriving from Ukraine, a third country, if you show your passport, you can then get one of these tickets to go to pretty much anywhere in the EU. We've seen people go to Poland, Germany, France. You come to this sort of makeshift office here and people will help you, sort you out with free accommodation, free transport if you can't get a ticket for the next couple of days. It's anticipated that around 300,000 people have already arrived in Hungary, coming from Ukraine, and more will do so over the next few days and weeks. And when you arrive here, it's just a team of volunteers trying to help, whether that's with translation, getting your tickets, food and drink over there. And for many people, what we've discovered is the people who came initially a couple of weeks ago, they had a plan, they had somewhere to go. The people now, they don't necessarily have family connections. I met 4 girls this morning in their early 20s, friends, not sisters, going to Vienna. They couldn't persuade their family in Ukraine to come with them.
Rosie Wright speaking a little earlier. Now, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has defended the UK's decision to maintain security checks for arrivals, using the Salisbury poisonings in 2018 as an example of the need to be vigilant.
I've been asked why couldn't we suspend security checks on people escaping Putin's war. Times of conflict, my friends, emphasise our need to remain watchful. Now, I know from the briefings I receive from the intelligence and security services that instability around the world brings with it greater threats.
In other news, 4 people on board a US military aircraft have died following a crash in northern Norway. The country's Joint Rescue Coordination Centre confirmed the Marine Corps aircraft was taking part in a NATO military exercise when it went missing. The government is being urged to publish the legal advice it received on whether P&O Ferries broke the law when it sacked its staff. Labour is asking if there are legal moves ministers could take to reverse the decision. 800 employees were fired without consultation via a pre-recorded message on Thursday. Former British Airways chairman Sir Martin Broughton says his group has global backing for its Chelsea Football Club bid. 3 groups are vying for the club, which was put up for sale by Roman Abramovich after he was sanctioned by the government for having links to Vladimir Putin. The Chelsea Supporters Trust says positive discussions are being held with the prospective new owners. British property developer Nick Candy and Chicago Cubs owners the Ricketts family have also submitted bids. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Simon, thanks very much indeed. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, that Boris Johnson speech, the minute it starts, I promise you, you won't miss a frame of it. The Conservative Spring Conference is already taking place. It's up in Blackpool. Yesterday we heard from the Chancellor Rishi Sunak there on the left of your picture. And so far today we've had speeches from the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who you saw in Simon's news bulletin. We also heard from Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, and we heard from Ben Wallace. Well, Ben Wallace will be joining us live on this programme a little later on. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on Russia to come to the negotiating table without delay. He wants direct talks with that man, if you're watching on television, Vladimir Putin, and there is Zelensky himself. The government here, however, have shown some reservations when it comes to sitting down for talks with Russia. I'll be discussing that with my panel of experts. On the subject of Ukraine, I'll also be joined, as I said, by the Defence Secretary about 22:01, so don't miss that. And we're talking to him about military support that the UK is giving to Ukraine and enforcing the borders, as he said himself to the conference just a wee while ago. As always, we genuinely want to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We are also on Twitter and Facebook, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, Ukraine and my studio panel in just a moment, but joining us now live from the Tory Spring Conference is political editor Tom Harwood. Intriguing start to the day, particularly given what's in the newspapers, with Ben Wallace addressing the conference on Ukraine and other matters, and Liz Truss addressing the conference on Ukraine and other matters. PM still to come.
Certainly, Ukraine has been the dominant theme here at the Tory Spring Conference today for understandable reasons. It's the issue that has seemed to move on the political conversation, dominate the political conversation in this country for understandable reasons. But of course, when we hear from the Prime Minister in just a couple of minutes' time, we're expecting him to try and move the conversation on as well, to look to the future, to see what's coming around the corner for this party. Because of course, we have very important local local elections on the 5th of May, and then a general election, perhaps next year, perhaps the year after. But of course, this morning, Oliver Dowden, the chairman of the Conservative Party, was gearing this voluntary party up. And of course, conferences like these are all about the voluntary party, the members of the Conservative Party, gearing them up for a future general election, saying it will be a lot of a tougher task than the last one in 2019. It's interesting, though, hearing what Liz Truss has had to say in the last half an hour or so. Hers was a wide-ranging speech, one that went a little bit beyond foreign policy as well, veering almost into the realm of economics. She spoke about supply-side reform. She spoke about the need to grow the economy, as well, of course, of talking about international alliances and her foreign affairs brief. I suppose the Prime Minister will be covering many briefs in his speech earlier on. I was speaking to some senior Conservative sources last night who suggested that the Prime Minister had actually finished his speech yesterday. He's already written it, which was much more than could be said for the speech he delivered at the Tory party conference, which I'm told he was still writing on the plane to the Scottish conference yesterday. But no, this seems to be a speech, unless there are some last-minute additions to it, that has been written and considered well in advance.
Yeah, we're going to be talking later on in the programme as well about just park Ukraine and the Prime Minister's capacity to write speeches on time and deliver them according to text. Just park that for one side as well. There was a piece in The Spectator yesterday by Isabel Hardman saying, as far as the PM's concerned, he may be slightly out of the woods, but Sue Gray, Partygate, that sort of stuff, it hasn't gone away. But what does appear to have gone away is the appetite to decapitate him. And there are pieces in lots of the papers today. We're going to leave you and cut straight to the Prime Minister, Tom. Listen closely, come back and give us your views in a moment.
The UK is announcing the largest and most severe package of sanctions that Russia has ever seen. We will continue on a remorseless mission to squeeze Russia from the global economy piece by piece, day by day and week by week. To our Ukrainian friends, in this moment of agony, I say that we are with you and we are on your side. Now, what we're doing is everything we can to support the Ukrainians with defensive military equipment. And we were the first European country to do so. We've trained 22,000 Ukrainian troops. We sent more than 2,000 anti-tank weapons, and we will. I'm
just going to lose that for a moment, simply because, to be absolutely brutal, between you, me and the Gatepost, that's a promotional video. That's number 10 Downing Street, Conservative Party, telling the delegates how utterly brilliant the Prime Minister is. And it is not our job to run that anymore. It would be for one about Sir Keir Starmer at the Labour conference or Sir Ed Davey at the Liberal Democrats conference. So the minute that bit finishes and it's actually Prime Minister Boris Johnson live, we will cut back to it. But let me just finish that point, not with Tom, because he's gone off to his desk to take a note on it. Later on in the programme, with Christopher Hope, who's the assistant editor and political correspondent of the Daily Telegraph, and also Sir Christopher Mayer, who's here with me in the studio, and Lord Lilly, Peter Lilly, who are, there they are, they're waiting to talk about Ukraine and other matters, and the Prime Minister. We will be saying, OK, what are the prospects now for the Prime Minister? Because this is an important conference where policy matters are discussed in some considerable detail, but also it's an important assessment of what state the party is to fight an election if it has to. Now, as Tom rightly said, the chairman of the party, Oliver Dowden, said first thing this morning, there's no talk at all of a general election. We will launch in May a 2-year campaign running up to an election in 2014. But in the Times newspaper, if you've got time, you may like to look up a piece that says that David Kanzani, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, number 10, has called the troops together and said, here's what we need to do, here are the priorities. It's Brexit first, cost of living second, interestingly, and we will be analysing that a little bit later on. I'm told that Tom is still there now at his desk and ready to go. I just cut away from that because it was purely the promotional speech. Final thought, and then you cut to the PM the minute that film stops. You were saying that you'd spoken to some Tories last night and were sensing the mood on the ground.
Yes, and I'm expecting to be interrupted any moment now because I can hear the faint sound of applause just in a few rooms across from where we are, where the Prime Minister may well be starting to speak any second now. But yes, certainly this was a speech that was more considered and will obviously need to be resetting the political calculation.
Okay, Tom, he's up. Off you go.
Absolutely, mate. I first spoke here. I want you to know I first spoke here 25 years ago. 1997, I was the freshly defeated candidate for Clwyd South, and I did the appeal, but I don't think they could get Jeffrey Archer that day because we as you will recall, we've been more or less wiped out. And what a joy it is to come back here today, quarter of a century on, and find that we have more Conservative MPs than at any time since the 1980s, and that we not only hold Clwyd South, we hold Blackpool South, my friends. And thank you. As we meet today, a tragedy continues to unfold in our European continent. A vicious and a barbarian attack on innocent civilians, the like of which we haven't seen since the 1940s. And Mr. Ambassador, sir, I know there you are. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, the Ukrainian Ambassador. I want to repeat to you directly what I told your wonderful President Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday. We stand with the Ukrainian people, and our hearts go out to them. And tens of thousands of people in this country are opening our homes to the people of Ukraine. We say thank you to them and we applaud them. And with every day that Ukraine's heroic resistance continues, it is clear that Putin has made a catastrophic mistake. And you have to ask yourself why he did it. Why did he decide to invade this totally innocent country? He didn't really believe that Ukraine was going to join NATO anytime soon. He knew perfectly well there was no plan to put missiles on Ukrainian soil. He didn't really believe the semi-mystical guff he wrote about the origins of the Russian people. I know whether you read it, Nostradamus meets Russian Wikipedia. I think that wasn't what it was about. I think he was frightened of Ukraine for an entirely different reason. He was frightened of Ukraine because in Ukraine they have a free press, and in Ukraine they have free elections. And with every year that Ukraine progressed, not always easily, towards freedom and democracy and open markets, he feared the Ukrainian example, and he feared the implicit reproach to himself. Because in Putin's Russia, you get jailed for 15 years just for calling an invasion an invasion. And if you stand against Putin in an election, you get poisoned or shot. And it's precisely, that's what happens. And it's precisely because Ukraine and Russia have been so historically close that he has been terrified of the effect of that Ukrainian model on him and on Russia. And he's been in a total panic about a so-called color revolution in Moscow itself. And that's why he's trying so brutally to snuff out the flame of freedom in Ukraine. And that's why it is so vital that he fails. Because a victorious Putin will not stop in Ukraine, and the end of freedom in Ukraine will mean the extinction of any hope of freedom in Georgia and then Moldova. And it will mean the beginning of a new age of intimidation across the whole of Eastern Europe, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. And if Putin succeeds in crushing Ukraine, it will be the green light for autocrats everywhere, in the Middle East, in the Far East. This is a turning point for the world, and it's a moment of choice. It's a choice between freedom and oppression. And I know there are some around the world, even in some Western governments, who invoke what they call realpolitik, and who say that we're better off making accommodations with tyranny. I have to say I believe they are profoundly wrong, and that to try to re-normalize relations with Putin after this, as we did in 2014, would be to make exactly the same mistake again. And that is why And that is why Putin must fail. And I know that it's the instinct of the people of this country, like the people of Ukraine, to choose freedom every time. I can give you a couple of famous recent examples. When the British people voted for Brexit in such large numbers, I don't believe it was because they were remotely hostile to foreigners. It's because they wanted to be free, to do things differently, and for this country to be able to run itself. I'll give you another example. When the British population came forward to be vaccinated at such incredible speed, voluntarily, unlike many other countries. I'm sure it was, of course, partly because they wanted to avoid catching COVID. Very sensible thing to do, by the way. I hope you've all had your boosters. And you have. Well, we're getting ready for a fourth jab because we're going to need it. But I'll tell you why people did it. Why did the British people come forward? I mean, 90% we got entirely voluntarily. Entirely voluntarily. It was because they wanted to get on with their lives. They were fed up with being told what to do by people like me. They were. We wanted to take back control of our lives, and so I'm proud that this government has done the things that so many people said were impossible. We got Brexit done. I'm proud that we delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, not once but twice, and the fastest booster rollout. And of course, yes, I am proud that this government has been in the lead in sticking up for freedom in Ukraine. This was the first European country to send defensive weapons to help the Ukrainians, and now dozens are following our lead. And I'm very grateful to my friend Ben Wallace, also there in the front row, for his foresight many months ago, and for getting me to read Putin's crazy essay, which I did. And we're talking continuously, Liz, Ben and I, we're talking continuously to our colleagues in the Ukraine support group to discuss what more we can do. And those conversations go on literally every day, and there will be more. I'm proud of what we did on sanctions. We were in the lead in sanctioning SWIFT and the banks when banning Aeroflot. We've now sanctioned more banks and individuals than any other European country, and we will be distraining their yachts and their assets. And of course, there is a cost to all these actions. Of course, there is. But the cost of doing nothing would be far, far higher. Putin's war is intended to cause economic damage to the West and to benefit him. And he knows that with every dollar increase in the price of a barrel of oil, he gets billions more in revenues from the sales of oil and gas. And that's the tragedy of the situation. He's been preparing for this moment by pushing hydrocarbons on the West like a backstreet pusher, feeding our addiction, creating a dependency. And now he wants to weaken the collective will to resist by pushing up the cost of living, hitting us at the pumps and in our fuel bills. And so we must respond, and we've got to do everything we can to help people with their daily costs, help people with the cost of living. And of course that means doing all the things that we're doing, lifting the living wage, cutting council tax bills, helping with fuel costs, giving billions to councils, millions more to help people in particular hardship. The best possible answer, of course, is to make sure that, this is the traditional Conservative answer, to make sure that we have a strong economy and strong economic fundamentals with well-paid jobs. And thanks to the speed of that booster rollout, we have the fastest growing economy in the G7. Unemployment now actually back to the level it was before the pandemic, virtually a record low, 3.9%. Youth unemployment at or near record lows. But if we're going to deal with the particular cost, the biggest cost that families now face, and tackle these rising fuel bills, the energy spike, we must take the bold steps necessary to end our dependence on Putin's oil and gas. And that is what we are doing. In the immortal phrase, it is time to take back control of our energy supplies. After years of short-termism and hand-to-mouth solutions, we are setting out a British energy security strategy. And we will make better use of our own naturally occurring hydrocarbons rather than import them top dollar from abroad and put the money into Putin's bank account. That does not mean in any way that we will abandon our drive for a low-carbon future. We're going to make some bets on nuclear power, some big bets on nuclear power, not just the big projects, but also the small modular reactors. And we're going to take that bullet-a-gate spirit of the booster rollout and use it to build more offshore wind at double-quick time, and many other investments in clean, green power. But if you ask me how we're going to pay for all this, I can tell you that I've been going around the world recently, and I've been talking to international investors who are yearning to make colossal long-term investments in British green infrastructure. Colossal. And there's a reason why people want to come to this country, many, many reasons why they want to come, but you're seeing them invest massively in everything from tech to finance to green power. And that is that they know what this government is doing. They know about, I mean, you may not believe it, but they do. They know about our levelling up agenda, my friends. They do. They've heard of it. They have. They're very well informed. And they know that we have a plan to unleash the potential of this whole country, and they can see how we are doing it. Making our streets safer with 20,000 more police, rounding up the county lines drugs gangs that cause such misery, stopping and searching the kids with the knives, giving the police the powers that they need, and by the way, giving the criminals the serious sentences that they deserve for the crimes that they commit. Tackling the middle-class drugs use, by the way, that helps to drive so much of the consumption. But doing things, thank you for that small clap for that. I think it's about time that the government said that we don't tolerate this kind of concern, because it is driving misery across the whole country. It's driving the county lines gangs, and we should be absolutely frank about it. But what we're doing goes far beyond that, and people around the world can see what levelling up is doing. The massive extension of fibre optic broadband, and I'm just trying to look for Nadine. How's Nadine? Perhaps Nadine isn't here. But we are, Oliver. You were doing it. Massive expansion when you were at DCMS of full fibre gigabit broadband. It is a great thing for our country, and we need to do it. We will go further and faster, investing massively in road and rail, and not just the colossal schemes of the integrated rail plan, Northern Powerhouse Rail, making sure that the Midlands and the north of the country finally get the kind of commuter-style rail networks that have been taken for granted for so long in the southeast. Huge schemes that we're doing. They'll be transformative for the UK economy. But look at the little things that we're doing as well, or relatively smaller schemes, such as the new tram improvements in Blackpool, which I was delighted to see the other day. I congratulate the Blackpool authorities on what they are doing, because it's driving tourism, it's driving investment, even more investment here in Blackpool, and that's what levelling up is. I went for a run. You may not believe it, but I did. I went for a run this morning on the beach. Absolutely beautiful. Better than anything in the Caribbean. That is not mere gallantry. It is true. And it's true. I mean, that time of the morning, 6:45, sun coming up, unbelievable. Tide right out, ribbed sand stretching for miles and miles, and absolutely beautiful. And as I ran along, I saw all the new hotels and the new attractions that will benefit from that new transport infrastructure going in, the new tram. Of course, government has a role: safer streets, better healthcare, better schools, better education, creating the conditions for that investment. But in the end, you need the private sector, the animal spirits of the private sector, to come in and have the confidence to invest. That's what it's all about. That's the fundamental symmetry at the heart of our Conservative vision. And as I was running along the sand, I saw a man who seemed to be prospecting with a kind of steel pole or tube. And I asked him what he was looking for, hydrocarbons, perhaps. And what do you think he was looking for? Does anybody have any idea? I tell you, it wasn't an oil well. No, he was looking for lugworms. And he showed me some lugworms that he had caught. And I will tell you, my friends, that the lugworm is not perhaps the most beautiful of God's creatures. But bigger fish love lugworms. And I want you to know that we Conservatives back everybody in this country who gets up early and invests their time and their skill and their energy and their effort in the hope of a bigger return. And that is... You need to use a lugworm. You need to use a lugworm to catch a bream, my friends. And I have a bream, as they say. I have a bream. I have a bream of a vision of a one-nation conservatism that takes that capitalist spirit and uses our wonderful free market system to make sure that we have the revenues further for Rishi Sunak to pay for our fantastic NHS and the 50,000 more nurses and the thousands more doctors that we're hiring. Pay for all the wonderful staff who are clearing the COVID backlogs. Pay for our defences, pay for Ben Wallace's troops, pay for our 20,000 more police officers, pay for investment in skills, like what we're doing with the Blackpool and Fylde College, the new multiversity that's opening, because that is what levelling up is all about. And it is those wonderful public services that create the climate of confidence, which means that private sector investment comes in. And it works. This formula levelling up, I believe, is right for the whole country. It's vital to understand this. It works everywhere. By unleashing talent everywhere across the UK. Still, under the old model, the most imbalanced European economy, by unleashing talent everywhere, you stop the overheating and the stress and the overdevelopment that is a part of the failed economic model. And we take the whole country forward together. That's what we're going to do. And that's why Rishi, I think, is totally right to be driving a new age of post-Brexit entrepreneurialism. Tough word to say. You know what? But you know what I mean. Low business taxes and other fiscal incentives, the 8 new free ports, and all the new freedoms that we're currently taking, driven by Jacob, who's our invigilator of these things, to do things differently and do things better now that we can. And I think it's because of the spirit that people can see in this country that we're seeing a surge of investment in the last few months. Another $1 billion just this week from Al-Fnaa, from Saudi Arabia in Teesside to make green aviation fuel, top of $1 billion from Nissan for a gigafactory, $1 billion from Mubadala for life sciences, $6 billion for Iberdrola, a Spanish company in East Anglian wind farms, $1.5 billion from Blackstone for labs and the creative sector. The list goes on and on. It is absolutely astonishing. $1 billion here, $1 billion there. You're talking about serious money. You're talking about tens of thousands of high-wage, high-skilled jobs. And there's another reason, of course, why investors come here. And when they think about the UK and what it's going to be like for themselves and their families, they think about the time that they're going to be spending in the UK. And I'll tell you something. It is the invincible strength of this country that we believe, by and large, and within the law, that people should be able to do whatever they want, provided they don't do any harm to anybody else. That's what it is. And that's called freedom. That's called freedom. And we don't need to be woke. We just want to be free. And that's why talented people are fleeing Russia, quite frankly, right now. And that's why they're flocking to the UK. And to get back to my theme, that's Putin's tragedy. That's his tragedy. There's a sense in which his disastrous error in Ukraine is itself an argument for democracy and freedom. I mean, seriously, if Putin had a free press, he had the BBC on his case. Well, let's be serious. He would know, whatever you may think, he would have known the truth. Or a version of it. He would have known the truth. No, come on. If he had free, impartial, responsible journalists, let me put it that way, then he would have known the truth that the Ukrainians are a proud nation with a charismatic leader, and he would have known before he set out on this disastrous and inhuman venture that they would fight to defend their homeland. He would have known that. And he wouldn't have locked himself in this echo chamber of sycophants. And on which subject, if Putin had to explain himself to a real parliament with real backbenchers, for whom, of course, all leaders must have a very, very lively regard, backbenchers who had to justify themselves every day to their electors, and of course at elections. You know, I don't believe that he would have been capable of such a crescendo of disastrous and self-destructive mistakes. Isn't that the truth? Now, look, I've got to tell you, I don't believe that democratic freedoms are going to sprout anytime soon in the Kremlin. Far from it. But with every day that passes, I think that Putin becomes a more glaring advertisement for the system that he hates and despises, and it becomes ever more obvious why we have to stick up for Ukraine. And we will. And that's why we will continue with absolute conviction to stick up for freedom under the law. Freedom under the law at home and abroad, even if it means making some tough decisions. We made a tough choice, for instance, over Christmas and New Year to keep our economy open, when some people said we should go back into lockdown. We made the tough choice to open up last July, when I think that the Labour Party said we were being reckless. Never forget, if we'd listened to Captain Hindsight and the Labour Party, I never tire of telling you this, but it's true, we would still be in lockdown, and we would certainly not be seeing the strong growth and employment that we're seeing today. When the Labour Party and the current leader were trying with might and main to install a leader who wanted, I'm serious, to abolish NATO, we were already training Ukrainian troops to fight. And it's an absolutely incredible fact, but it's true. At a time when Russia is being led by a president who's capable of bullying and threats, and who's plainly capable of making dangerous and irrational decisions, we have a Labour Party whose shadow cabinet is stuffed with people who only recently voted to abolish the UK's independent nuclear deterrent. That's right, 8 of them. The shadow foreign secretary, unbelievable, the shadow levelling up secretary, shadow transport secretary, I haven't got the entire list, but you can find it out. That's them. Do we want them in charge, my friends, at this moment? Do we want them running up the white flag? Do you see them standing up to Putin's blackmail? I don't. By the way, in the next few weeks, do we want them running our councils, when we know that up and down the country, Labour councils cost you more and Conservatives deliver better services? Do we want them in charge of the economy of this amazing country of ours, when there has never been a Labour government that left with unemployment lower than when they arrived? Let me tell you, when you go out campaigning in the next few weeks, as we all will, joyfully, let me tell you that my message to everybody on the doorstep is that it is conservatives. It's conservatives who get things done even when they look difficult. And it's conservatives who take the tough decisions to help you, to be on your side, to help you with the cost of living. And it's conservatives who stand up for freedom against the blackmail of Vladimir Putin. And I'll tell you why we do it. And we do it not out of ideology, because we know through long experience that it's only by sticking up for freedom that we can deliver long-term prosperity and security. And that's what we will deliver together. Thank you all very much, and thank you for coming to Spring Conference. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Well, there we are, Prime Minister. An uproarious reception there from the faithful, but of course you've just pinch of reality, it is a Conservative Party conference, it is a Conservative Party leader, and it is a Conservative Party Prime Minister. Even lugworms, I have a bream. Only Boris Johnson, I suspect, could get away with that one. Tom Harwood was listening to it with the cold and detached antenna of a brilliant political editor. Tom, what did you make of it?
It was an extraordinary speech, Alistair, one that stretched, as you rightly say, from fishing metaphors to the importance of nuclear deterrence. But what really tied it together was bookending this situation in Ukraine, defending the free, liberal, democratic order under which we live, and how that makes us more prosperous and actually makes for better government as well. Contrasting the top-down authoritarianism of the Putin regime, how that makes Putin makes mistakes, how that makes Putin's people poorer, contrasting that with a uniquely Borisonian vision of investment across the United Kingdom, driving economic growth led by a free market approach. That was the overriding thread of the speech. And of course, right at the end there, a few digs in for the Labour Party as well, coming up to those local elections. This was a setting out of what Boris's vision for the country is. Yes, talking about Ukraine, but talking about what's beyond it too.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. Sitting listening to that with me here in the studio, which you caught a glimpse of earlier on, two very good friends of mine sitting there in the middle. I first knew him as Peter Lilly, now Lord Lilly, who served Margaret Thatcher with distinction in social security, in trade, but also shadowed on the Treasury brief, and also Christopher Mayer, former ambassador to Washington and to Germany, but also number 10 insider working alongside John Major. Peter, I was watching both of you, lots of giggles and just one or two but Ben Wallace invoked the spirit of Margaret Thatcher. Boris Johnson has just invoked the spirit of Margaret Thatcher, both in the Ukrainian context and in basic fundamental political philosophy of freedom and markets. Did you believe him?
Yes, I think he does believe that. And Tom got it right, that it was this the unique feature of the speech, which wasn't his best speech, by the way, was that he recognised that standing up for freedom in Ukraine, the opposition to freedom in Ukraine from Putin, goes hand in hand with our own domestic freedoms politically and economically. And that was a good thesis, I think, to put across.
Yeah. Now, all prime ministers will always suffer, and you know this from your press secretary days, as well as your having worked in the embassies. Everybody will now pick that apart and say, well, you can't have that great freedom surging economy if you've got your chancellor in 48 hours about to put national insurance up, this, that and the other. But on the Ukraine, that didn't sound like the speech of a negotiator. That sounded like the speech of somebody who wanted to do battle.
Well, if you're going to be successful in negotiation, you don't want to make speeches like a negotiator. You want to make speeches like someone who's going into battle. What you say in negotiation and what you say to the public at large become two different things, although tactically they are linked. So I would have, if Margaret Thatcher were Prime Minister, I would expect her to take a very tough line in public about Putin, much as Boris has done. Boris made a very important point, which is impossible ever to normalise relations with Putin's Russia.
Absolutely.
It's a very, very, very important point. But I could imagine Thatcher saying, if she were here today, saying to Biden, don't go wobbly on me, Joe. We need not only to take a tough line, we need to take a clever line. And taking a clever line means leaving the Russians in some doubt about what we should do. In other words, Biden made a tactical mistake by being so clear about not intervening militarily in Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that he said, and again, you jot down stuff that you think are particularly interesting, and the conversation that took place between Joe Biden and President Xi of China yesterday, Biden said, if you back the Russians, rearm them, re-equip them, you, China, could face trade sanctions. And Xi is reported to have said, hang on, you go down that road at your peril. You're talking about global trade grinding to a halt. You're a former trade secretary. Johnson knows that. Johnson said that bang in the middle. Sanctions are the right thing to do, but they are a very costly thing to do.
They're costly and they take time. And I hope we don't think they're going to solve all the problems of the world. We can't have sanctions against everybody we don't like. So I would be cautious about getting too bellicose and saber-rattling about sanctions against China as well as against Russia.
Yeah. Did you get that point as well about the trade deals?
Well, I thought if Biden actually said what his spokesman said he said in the conversation with President Xi of China, he made a mistake. Because Henry Kissinger, where are you when we need you? You're still alive, but you're in your 90s, and it's not actually in his prime anymore. Because the one thing that I see as a possibility, which would be an alternative approach to China, not necessarily in public, but certainly in private, is that you start to drive a wedge between Beijing on the one hand and Moscow on the other, just as Kissinger did in the early years of détente. Because we're now starting to see, I mean, I've only got this second hand, because I don't read Chinese, we're now starting to see reports of the Chinese state media starting to shift their position a bit by now showing pictures on television of the damage done to civilian life and buildings and structures in Ukraine. Is this China starting to move a little bit away from its professed no limits, so-called, alliance with Russia? The answer is possibly so. And what we need American diplomacy to do now, not European diplomacy, because we don't count enough in Chinese eyes. What we need now is American diplomacy to start to push into these areas so that we can, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, divide and rule.
Yeah. Ironically, you were in office again at that period. Don't go wobbly on me, and cruise missiles in Eastern Europe and Greenham Common and that era. Christopher and I have talked about this before, but I don't think you and I have. I am profoundly worried, as the son of an RAF officer and the rest of it, that whatever happens in Ukraine, a new line has been drawn, and that is, as Ben Wallace said a little earlier, we're defending the Baltics to the hilts, we're defending Poland to the hilts. That's the new line for NATO. Ukraine has, in effect, been nodded through.
Well, NATO has to be very careful.
Yeah.
If this is to be credible, that Article 5 applies a single boot crossing over into the territory of any one of its 30 members, all 30 of them are at war with that country. We mustn't be promiscuous about extending that guarantee to others who are not actually members of NATO, but who are involved in conflicts where we have every sympathy with them. So I think the government's taken the right position, and NATO has taken the right position of saying, so far but no further, our guarantee is for every member of NATO. We will help, we will sympathise with, we'll have sanctions, but we will not take military action in defence of countries who are not members of NATO. Christopher's a much greater expert of foreign affairs than me, but that's my instinct.
Well, then come in on it, but just to bear in mind, again, it's briefings, but we understand that within the last 36, 48 hours, that Putin says to Erdogan in Turkey, here are my conditions. They don't ever join NATO, and Boris Johnson just said, we're never going to do that anyway. Secondly, they disarm. Well, that was supposed to have been protected in the treaty that also said you don't go invading me and what have you. But the bottom line in all of that is, we're not going to go in there and fight on Ukrainian soil to defend them. If there's a negotiation, there will have to be concession by Ukraine as well.
Indeed, there will have to be. And the hard question, which nobody has really asked or even tried to answer, is how does this end? How does this end? On what terms? And the quick answer to that is that the way it ends, if there's ever going to be a negotiated agreement, will reflect the state of the battlefield. Who's up, who's down, who's bogged down, who's losing. It will reflect the balance of power between the Russian armed forces and the Ukrainian armed forces, how much territory has been taken, how much has been defended, and we don't know where that is going to come. Therefore, it's not possible to say right now, oh, it's hopeful. Negotiations have begun. They've begun all right, but they've begun at a very low level, with each side standing on its maximalist positions. And one of the maximalist Ukrainian positions, and this goes to Peter's point about Article 5, is if we're not going to join NATO, and they know they're never going to get into NATO anytime soon, they knew that before the invasion, they want something that is as almost as good. And going back to your point about the Budapest Agreement of 1994, which has now been trampled on by Putin because he says the Ukraine of today is not the Ukraine of then, what the Ukrainians are now asking for is for the UN Security Council to give guarantees, as opposed to Diplo-speak, assurances in 1994 to give guarantees of Ukraine's security, which is another way of saying Article 5.
Yeah.
Because inside the UN Security Council is the United States, there is France, there is us, 3 nuclear powers, and there is the Russians. There are the Russians.
Sure.
But essentially, it'll be the Ukrainians who negotiate, not us.
Well, though Boris Johnson says he's willing to be the wingman.
Fair enough. I'm sure we will have
loads of wingmen.
An influence, but it's up to the Ukrainians to decide whether they want to make or willing to make concessions in the face of the terrible destruction or prolong the conflict, guerrilla warfare, the further destruction of their country. They will take that terribly difficult decision. The problem will be for us if they reach some kind of settlement which they're prepared to accept, and the Russians say, yes, we will sign up to it, but the further condition is the West stop sanctions. And then what do we do? I don't know. In those circumstances, it's very difficult. If the Ukrainians say, please stop sanctions because we've got a settlement we can agree with, and we don't want to normalize relations with Putin.
Do you actually think, Peter, that Ukraine can win militarily?
Not win, but they can impose far greater costs on Russia than ever Russia expected, or certainly than I expected.
But as long as there's no air cover, and that's your clause 4 point, they're not members of NATO, therefore we can't risk shooting down Russians. Their cities are going to continue to be pounded. We see it in the news bulletins. The pictures are just horrendous. Nothing's to stop Russia doing that.
Well, quite, and that's why that is clearly the calculation Zelensky is making, and he's indicated that he's prepared to make compromises now that he wasn't beforehand. But it's his choice, not ours. We can't negotiate over his head with the Soviet Union. I don't think with Russia, rather.
Final question, I hope to put it. Ben Wallace will be joining us now. I've just been told at 1:05, which is great because obviously the Prime Minister overran, and that's good, so you won't want to miss that. That's Ben Wallace, the Secretary of State for Defence, at 1:05. But one of the things that struck me as well, and I'm going to put it to Ben when he comes up, and I'll put it to you, and it's my final question. You lived through that era, we did, we all three of us knew each other in those days. When the wall fell in '89 and when Eastern Europe embraced democracy, all of those things the Prime Minister was celebrating, we and the Americans and others did what was called the peace dividend. We cut our defence budgets quite sharply, although Ben said he's got a little bit more money back now, but it went down, 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 tiniest army since the 18th century or what have you. Did we make that peace dividend a little too soon?
I'm not sure we did. I think it was a sensible thing to do. What we've seen now is clearly we have to review our military spending and our strategy. But actually the Russian forces, despite the huge expenditure, the supposed renewal, are less effective than we all feared.
Fascinating. And final thought from you. We talked last time you were in about Germany having revolutionised its attitude to defence and spending. Italy also needs to catch up, does it not?
Well, the Italian armed forces are supposed to be quite effective, but by and large, when we talk about NATO improving its spending more on its defence budgets, and particularly the sort of German revolution, no one seems to talk very much about Italy in all of this because it doesn't have a terrific reputation as a martial power, if I can put it like that. But what is clear is that one thing we have to sort out intellectually between the European Union and NATO is this Macron idea of strategic autonomy for the EU, because you can't have strategic autonomy for the EU and increase defence budgets that go into NATO.
And Italy,
one or the other.
Home of huge and important US Navy NATO bases as well. A very, very important.
And a strong ally also of China, I'm afraid to say.
We're going to be talking a bit later on about the economy and other matters. We'll be talking about Boris Johnson a bit later on. For the time being, thank you, gentlemen, both very much indeed. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and Radio. We've lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon, including the latest from the effort by the equestrian community in the UK to help refugees fleeing following that Ukrainian invasion. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking fine and dry with plenty of sunshine, although it will be rather breezy. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and there will be plenty of sunshine around. Winds will be fairly strong along the English Channel coast, making it feel cool here, but elsewhere it will feel warm. Moving further east, and again there will be plenty of sunshine, but with the keen wind it will feel quite cool along the coasts. across and into Wales, and it will be a pleasantly warm spring afternoon with plenty of sunshine. It will be breezy here too, especially over the hills. The Midlands and northwest England will also have a pleasant afternoon with plenty of sunshine. Despite it being only March, UV levels will be moderate this afternoon, so do take care in the sunshine. The breeze will be a bit more of a feature in northeast England, especially along the coast. If sheltered from the window, it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine. Much of Scotland will have a sunny afternoon, and it will be very warm for this time of year in the west, perhaps reaching 20 degrees Celsius in the odd spot. Northern Ireland will also see plenty of spring sunshine this afternoon, with the warmest weather across the western half of the country. Eastern areas will be a little cooler thanks to the breeze. The fine and dry weather will continue into the evening, although it will remain rather breezy, especially in the south, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is exactly 5 to 1. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Now, they were the stars of our Good Causes segment last week, and one of them, I'm delighted to say, is here to give us an update about the great work this week. Now, Stephen that's Stephen Barnes, is actually in Poland, and in the last couple of moments I've been told we can't link up with him. He's at the head of a convoy of 9 18-ton lorries that normally transport beautiful horses, show jumpers and three-day eventers around the country. But my very, very good friend and his buddy, Matt Millen, who came up with the idea in the first place, is able now to join me live from his home. And there he is with his Ukrainian shirt on. I don't know if they told you, but we can't link up with Steve, but I gather you've got some picture of the effort. So just to remind folk, horse boxes, equestrian community, taking aid and supplies to the lovely people of Ukraine. How's it gone?
We've had problems, Alistair. I'm not going to lie to you. A few problems along the way with different things, which I'll explain. But it's gone really well. And following your programme from last week, and I must thank you for this, the amount of people that contacted us was unbelievable with the extra things coming in. We've had stopovers that we've had to arrange very, very last minute. Family down in Suffolk put the whole team up on Thursday night when the guys pulled out. We've had offers of jobs in the equestrian sector from people up in Scotland. We've the GoFundMe page that we started purely to cover some of the cost of diesels. A great company in Stafford approached us and rang up, and we took all 9 trucks there on the way down, and they filled every single truck up and wouldn't take a penny off us. So we're doing supermarket sweeps, would you believe, when we hit when the team got into Poland.
No, I believe it. When you were just a moment ago, because a lot of people, as you know, listen to us on radio rather than watching us on TV, and during your last answer, there was a lovely array of about 20 people standing beside 2 of the lorries. But as I said, there are 9 lorries. What's in the back? What's the stuff you're taking?
The stuff that we're taking, there was 9 lorries, you're absolutely right. Sadly, we've lost one because of a breakdown. That's another story, but they're heading back home and done a tremendous job and gutted. But in the back, Alistair, predominantly there are medical first aid kits. We have nappies, formula milk, clothes, there's so much, I can't go on. We've had a few issues with the food aspect because we're not allowed to take perishable goods over, but that's why we're heading to the supermarkets now with 9 trucks and 24 people getting out to get the trolleys and fill them up. That's the plan heading into Poland overnight. What else is in the back? There's I don't know whether you've got the picture. If you've got the picture of the 5 rabbits that somebody knitted for us, we haven't got a clue who did those, but they've come up now. Honestly, with their mascot.
What we're looking at on TV, and I'll explain to folk who are listening on radio, is the living of one of the lovely trucks, basically the bedding and the sofa, which you and I know perfectly well, but I'll explain that for those who aren't in the equestrian world. And I do gather from you and Steve that you couldn't, in terms of planning to bring people back, you can't simply put them in the back of the truck because, again, there are rules and regulations about seatbelts. So how many people will you actually be able to bring back if refugees want to join you on that journey?
We've got a team over in Poland as well who are supplying us with translators and a couple of vehicles as well. The support on that, and obviously the change in the laws from this week of how people can come over with the visas, etc., has helped us incredibly with the sponsorship forms as well. We do have spare seats in the cabs. I see what you're saying about people travelling the back with safety belts, but you know, as I said to you last time, Stephen doesn't always stick to the rules, to be fair. So I'm waiting to see what he's doing because the team will eventually split up. When they get into Helm tomorrow, some are going to stay to move refugees down into further across into Germany, Belgium, Holland, France. And then some of the team have got to come back and they've done a tremendous job.
Yeah.
We get that entirely. But I must stress as well, Alistair, the team that are staying, you talk about the living, all of those are fully stocked up, ready to go with water. The team are going to make a nice sort of area in the back of the trucks. We've got fake grass for them to sit on and keep them warm and blankets. And the shower is going to be used for anybody who wants, any of those refugees from 10 o'clock tomorrow in Helm who want to shower, queue up because 9 trucks will be ready to go.
Matt, keep in touch. We'll link up with Steve and we'll do it again. For the time being, many thanks. Well done, all of you. And keep in touch there, my good buddy, Matt Millen. The time is just a few seconds past 1 o'clock, and you are watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. And we've lots more to come in just a moment. Hello and welcome. If you have just joined us, the time is 30 seconds past 1 o'clock. And I am Alastair Stewart, and I'm joined by my friends as we move into the second and last hour of our programme. We'll be keeping you company on TV and on radio with plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion. We'll be hearing what you think and also expressing some of the emails and views that you've sent in about Mr. Putin, about Ukraine, about all manner of stuff. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Simon Pusey.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The war in Ukraine has dominated the Conservative Party Spring Conference, with the Prime Minister saying Russia's president launched the invasion because he fears a free and democratic nation as his neighbour. Boris Johnson told the Tory faithful a victorious Vladimir Putin will not stop in Ukraine.
It will be the green light for autocrats everywhere, in the Middle East, in the Far East. This is a turning point for the world, and it's a moment of choice. It's a choice between freedom and oppression.
Boris Johnson there. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss told the Forum the crisis in Ukraine has showed the strength of the free world.
Meet here in Blackpool. We face a different world from the one we've known over the past decades. Putin's illegal, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine has shattered the notion that freedom is free. We cannot stand by and see these precious freedoms eroded and the clock turned back to the horrific oppression of the Soviet era. We cannot and we will not rest until Ukraine's sovereignty is restored.
And the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, defended the decision to maintain security checks on refugees arriving in the UK, using the Salisbury poisoning in 2018 as an example of the need to be vigilant.
I've been asked why couldn't we suspend security checks on people escaping Putin's war. Times of conflict, my friends, emphasise our need to remain watchful. Now, I know from the briefings I receive from the intelligence and security services that instability around the world brings with it greater threats.
Priti Patel there. In Ukraine, the prosecutor's office says 112 children have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. In the east, the governor of Luhansk says a humanitarian corridor is being opened for residents trying to evacuate the region. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for face-to-face talks with his Russian counterpart, telling Vladimir Putin it's time for comprehensive and meaningful negotiations.
I want everyone to hear me now, especially in Moscow. The time has come for a meeting. It is time to talk. The time has come to restore territorial integrity and justice for Ukraine. Otherwise, Russia's losses will be such that it will take several generations to recover.
More than 8,500 visas have been granted under the UK's family scheme for Ukrainians. The UN Refugee Agency says over 3 million people have now fled their homes, crossing into neighbouring countries. GB News reporter Rosie Wright has the latest from Hungary.
This is Budapest Keleti station. Hundreds of refugees already today, women, children, arriving through here off platform 6, get to this humanitarian centre, and there's information about tickets they can get. Any Ukrainian citizen arriving from Ukraine and third country, if you show your passport, you can then get one of these tickets to go to pretty much anywhere in the EU. We've seen people go to Poland, Germany, France. You come to this sort of makeshift office here and people will help you, sort you out with free accommodation, free transport if you can't get a ticket for the next couple of days. It's anticipated that around 300,000 people have already arrived in Hungary coming from Ukraine, and more will do so over the next few days and weeks. And when you arrive here, it's just a team of volunteers trying to help, whether that's with translation, getting your tickets, food and drink over there. And for many people, what we've discovered is the people who came initially a couple of weeks ago, they had a plan, they had somewhere to go. The people now, they don't necessarily have family connections. I met 4 girls this morning in their early 20s, friends, not sisters, going to Vienna. They couldn't persuade their family in Ukraine to come with them.
Rosie Wright there. In other news, 4 people on board a US military aircraft have died following a crash in northern Norway. The country's Joint Rescue Coordination Centre confirmed the Marine Corps aircraft was taking part in a NATO military exercise when it went missing. The government is being urged to publish the legal advice it received on whether P&O Ferries broke the law when it sacked its staff. Labour is asking if there are legal moves ministers could take to reverse the decision. 800 employees were fired without consultation via a pre-recorded message on Thursday. Former British Airways chairman Sir Martin Broughton says his group has global backing for its Chelsea Football Club bid. 3 groups are vying for the club, which was put up for sale by Roman Abramovich after he was sanctioned by the government for having links to Vladimir Putin. The Chelsea Supporters Trust says positive discussions are being held with the prospective new owners. British property developer Nick Candy and Chicago Cubs owners the Ricketts family have also submitted bids. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Simon, thanks very much indeed. Let's cut live now straight away to the Conservative conference, where I'm delighted to be joined live by Ben Wallace, the Secretary of State for Defence. Ben, first of all, thanks for the flexibility. The Prime Minister overran a little bit, and thank you very much for reshuffling your schedule. President Zelensky says it is now time to talk. Liz Truss, in an interview in the papers this morning, says, in effect, I wouldn't trust Putin further than I could throw him. Where do you stand on talks?
Well, I think talks have to be meaningful, and I think that's what President Zelensky is calling for. He doesn't want to be run round in circles by a Russian president that is potentially just carrying on. And I think my colleague, the Foreign Secretary, made the very astute observation that for someone who wants to talk, carrying on shelling innocent people and civilian areas of towns doesn't really look like he means it. But I think what we do want is, Ukraine to have meaningful talks, and that's what the president's after. But as I've said all along on this invasion, we have to judge Russia by its actions, not by its words.
Interesting that just a few moments ago the Prime Minister said there was never a chance that Ukraine was going to join NATO, and there was never a chance that Ukraine were going to reintroduce nuclear weapons upon their territory. So if neutrality and disarmament's conceded, then Putin has won.
No, I mean, what Putin wants is people not to have the freedom to choose their destiny. First and foremost, people. NATO doesn't choose people. It doesn't go around the world growing itself. People choose NATO, and Ukraine wanted to choose that path of NATO. And I think President Zelensky's comments about it was never going to join or wasn't going to be allowed to join, I think is what he actually said, was based on the fact that you have to get all 30 members to agree. Britain was always a supporter of Ukraine joining NATO, but you have to get all 30 over the line. And I think what he was saying is effectively an observation of the fact. But I think what is also important, as I said in an article in January, that President Putin himself knows this isn't really about NATO. He wrote an article last July where he was very clear. It was based on a very bizarre view of history and a view that somehow Ukraine was Russia and Russia was Ukraine. And that was really the cause behind us, this sort of sense that he was uniting the people of the ancient Rus. And I think, as the Prime Minister said, the problem is if he's successful in Ukraine, it won't stop there, because in his own articles and speeches, he effectively lays claim to the Baltic states and other parts of what was either once the former Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. And I think it's really important people understand that when you have a president who writes and speaks like he does about sort of ethnic nationalism, and that he has sort of rights over them, then we should all worry for our own security. It's that type of language that led to the Second World War.
Pretty profound stuff. The final question is, I hope, equally profound as well, Ben. I think the last time you and I chatted was at a Royal British Legion event in Staffordshire, which was of itself very moving. You were delayed because of dreadful weather, but you were still utterly determined to be there, and you were, and the veterans were very, very grateful. Everything that you stood for when you served in the Scots Guards, everything you stand for as a democratically elected politician is at stake in this, isn't it? Are you conscious of that every time you clock in of a morning?
Yeah, I am, and I've not only seen people fight for their own freedoms. I've visited Ukraine for 5 times over the last sort of 7-8 years. I've seen for myself the front line with the Donbass a few years ago. I'm also consciously aware that all of us have values that are incredibly important, and maybe in the past we've all taken that for granted. And I think there's something really inspiring about this tragedy, if I can say it that way, is that many of us, everyone all sort of thought, well, young people, they're interested in their iPhones and TikTok, but you know what? They hold the values as important as our grandparents do, and they're prepared to stand and fight for it. And I think that is something that we should all be inspired by, that there's a much younger generation out there, younger than you and I, anyhow, Alistair, who are really passionate about this awful invasion of Ukraine. And whether they come from the left or the right, they're all united. And I think, freedom isn't free. It's the inscription above the South Korean War Memorial. And I think we recognise that is the case, and the Ukrainians know it right now. That's why we're determined to stand by them, lead with our action, lead with our support, and we are helping them defend their country, and we'll do everything we can to continue that support.
Sure. Final, but I tend to say final, but just listening to that answer, one other point comes to my mind. that generation as well would not have remembered Hitler and the rest of it, but just to get a clear idea of the very nature of this enemy, not only one who is prepared to bomb tower blocks into submission, but as Priti Patel said earlier this morning, is willing to poison door handles in Salisbury and murder people, and even hack your phone in the middle of the Ministry of Defence. This is a pretty brutal, evil, indiscriminate enemy, is it not?
It's definitely a government that doesn't believe in respecting the individual, the rights of an individual, the human rights, the freedoms that we hold so dear, and it also doesn't have any respect, by the looks of things, to sovereignty. And I was the security minister when a nerve agent was used on the streets of Salisbury, had clearly no regard for international law on chemical weapons, nor indeed for Britain's sovereign integrity. That's a state of mind, that's a belief set, that's what we're seeing right now. And we should definitely worry that there are people out there who think that it is perfectly acceptable to do what President Putin is doing, and President Putin and his general staff think it is acceptable. Well, it isn't acceptable. And the one shock that President Putin has had is I think he thought that most of the international community would splinter and not all agree. They have agreed. He's got the heaviest set of sanctions I think we've ever seen against one country. We've seen lethal aid flowing in from countries across Europe, from, including countries that are traditionally more neutral, like Ireland, who haven't helped with lethal aid, but helped with other types of humanitarian aid. We've seen Belgium supply lethal aid. Britain, Scandinavian countries, and even non-NATO countries like Sweden and Finland have been engaged. His biggest shock is that he woke up one morning to discover the international community is totally prepared to isolate him and his economy. That's got to hurt, that will hurt. And at the same time, he's discovered that Ukrainians are brave, strong people who are going to fight for their country, every inch of it. And that is causing his so-called invincible army to prove itself as not very invincible.
Well, it's good of you to join us on what I know is a busy day for you and a busy conference indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Good to see you again.
I'm lucky enough to be near home. Thank you very much.
I heard you say that, and Tornado fighter jets are built in your constituency. You politicians never miss the chance to mention the home turf, and I don't blame you for a moment.
I live here. It's so nice to work on a Saturday near home.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the other side of politicians. It's just nice to be home at the weekend as well. You see, it's not just you, it's me, and it's Ben Wallace as well. The Secretary of State for Defence, light-hearted there at the end, but really fundamentally profound thoughts earlier on about, as the Prime Minister said as well, what is at stake in the Ukraine, and the willingness of the United Kingdom and allies to stand foursquare by them, but to recognise the rules of engagement, as you rightly pointed out. I know he's the same party as you, but the fact that he did serve as a Scots Guard, and he's not the only one, there are people like Tom Tugendhat as well who wore the Queen's uniform, does seem to me to give a certain amount of clout. And to be fair, Dan Jarvis on the Labour side as well.
That's true. I've never served in the forces, and I respect those who have, and I'm glad we've got someone who has done so in that position now, and I think he's represented this country both in words and deeds very effectively throughout this crisis, and indeed before we knew it was a crisis, when he was preparing for it.
Yeah. That was, I wasn't going to bring you in, but I wanted to, because particularly on that particular point. It really matters whether you're an ambassador or whether you're in the press department within Number 10, that the ministers are all singing from the same hymn sheet, and from Ben and from the Prime Minister and from Priti Patel even and Liz Truss. I was looking for a sliver of difference on negotiations. A sliver there is not.
No, there isn't a sliver there, and that's a very good thing indeed if you're a Number 10 press secretary. My nightmare when I worked in John Major's Number 10 was to come in on a Monday morning and find that very distinguished cabinet ministers in John Major's government, never Peter Lilly, of course, were singing not even in harmony. You didn't expect them to sing in unison. You did expect them to sing in harmony. You would come in on a Monday morning and you'd find the bum notes all over the place. So what did you do about it? I'm not going to name names.
No, he did sing his little list of welfare benefits that needed to be covered.
Peter Lee was impeccable as a cabinet minister. But I had horrible Mondays, and sometimes you couldn't actually stitch the stuff together. It was not possible. I used to do it by assertion, by saying, well, I can't see any difference between X and Y speech, for God's sake. And of course, there was a chasm between them.
All right. Now, we're going to bring in another guest. I'm delighted to be joined down the line now as well to join this brilliant duo by Christopher Hope, a good friend of mine, Associate Politics Editor of the Daily Telegraph, and there he is. Christopher, I don't know whether you were able to be good enough to be watching earlier on, but we've listened to Boris Johnson, we've talked to Ben Wallace, we've troweled over what's happening in Ukraine, the horrors of it and the ghastliness of Putin. I want now to cut to the brutal political chase with the three of you, not in any way to belittle the horrors on the battlefields of Ukraine or the streets of Ukraine, but has this been Boris Johnson's war? Kick us off, Christopher.
Well, in a sense that we're not actually fighting, aren't we? What he's done is very cleverly, and with Ben Wallace there, leading the way in terms of getting the kind of the West organised into an opposition of sanctions against Boris Johnson. Ben Wallace particularly is well liked by Estonia, the Baltic states. That's next in Putin's eye line, and that's when we get into the issue of triggering conflict with NATO. Hasn't happened yet. I think it's been. I think Britain's done really well at this. I think that we sit really, really snugly in the international system. We've got the US on one side, the European Union looking at its own army, and that makes Britain, a massive contributor to NATO, really influential. And I was wondering if you might ask Ben Wallace just then whether he might want to be NATO Secretary General, because the job's up in September, and I've heard the Yanks want him to do it, and he's much tipped for that job. If so, he'd be great, because I think you've seen him lead the way there, going to Moscow when they could go to Moscow and put it to the Russians. I mean, I think he's really done really well. I think it's. I was fascinated hearing your two colleagues there, Christopher and Peter, talk about spin and the rest of it. In the old days, we used to have to write about thinly veiled attacks, which meant they're barely attacks at all in the Labour years, and it becomes more transparent, I think, since the Brexit years. But on this one, clearly, there is unity behind the government, and that's why it's very hard for Labour to go anywhere apart from support the government.
Yeah, indeed so. And I'm sorry I missed the NATO question, but I will bear it in mind next time, hopefully before that appointment is made. I'll bring Peter in last because he's the been there, done it cabinet minister. But Christopher's point there, thinly veiled attack, exactly the point that you were making earlier on. But let me put it to you quite bluntly. Has it been Boris Johnson's war? Has he risen out of the ashes of all of that ghastliness that he was facing a couple of months ago?
Well, Boris has obviously had a very good war indeed. I think the question in British politics is, given that we're not going to have a general election until 2024, is will this have a lasting effect and impact on the British voters' choices? Now, I remember George Bush Sr., who had 90% approval ratings after the first Iraq war. And yet, when the presidential election came, when was it, 1992, he lost to Bill Clinton. Now, American politics is not the same thing as British politics, but the question I do ask myself is, even if Boris has had a good war and will continue to have a good war, when things like the cost of living crisis, so-called energy prices, tax rises, national insurance payments, start to hit the British voter, will that obscure everything that Boris has achieved in this war and may yet achieve? And I don't know what the answer is, except I would say, in a snap response, is that normally domestic considerations trump those of foreign and security policy.
Peter.
Well, that's absolutely true. I seem to remember it was that president who said, read my lips, no new taxes.
Yes.
And that proved to be a broken promise that was more damaging or offset his success in war. Now, what has happened clearly is that Ukraine has shown the Prime Minister can lead the country in the way the country wants to be led, and it therefore dwarfs all the Partygate stuff, which, although many people I respect and know thought that was terribly important, many people I don't know but do respect in the general public.
And indeed the Metropolitan Police and Sue Gray may yet decide it is terribly important.
I could never take it as seriously as anybody else could, whether or not the Prime Minister having a drink with his staff in the place he works and lives was a sort of nationally defining moment. This is a nationally defining moment, but it also aggravates the economic problems the government's going to have to deal with. And we may find that in the long term, that is more damaging to the Conservative government rather than to Boris than the fact that he's got out of and hopefully put behind him all that Partygate stuff.
Yeah. Let me bring Christopher back in. Christopher Hope, not Christopher Mayer. Intriguing as well in the Boris Johnson contribution an hour or so ago, where he was going through all of the philosophical stuff and what have you. He invoked freedom in the context of Ukraine and elsewhere, but as Brexit as well. He said, we voted for Brexit because we cherished freedom. And we read in The Times, a competitor newspaper of yours this morning, that Brexit's the #1 campaigning issue when that election comes, whether it's 2 years down the road, as Christopher Mayer says, or a little sooner, perhaps, as Kanzani seems to imply. People are going to get honked off if they think Brexit's unfinished business, aren't they?
Well, I think part one of Brexit has finished. What the government has failed to do so far is take any real advantage of the opportunities of Brexit. I mean, they put a guy in there called Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's called the Brexit Opportunities Minister. But what's he doing so far? He's gone through and trying to find regulations to cut. I mean, how about being really aggressive with state aid? Why not try and take on the European Union? It's all about growth the next year, the next 2 years, because, frankly, there is no more tax they can take. They've broken... as Peter said there, no new taxes. Well, page 2 of the 2019 manifesto said they would not increase national insurance. And guess what? That goes up in April next month. And that's why it's all about growth, growth, growth. And you have got the opportunity. Many people voted for this opportunity in 2016. We're 6 years later. Deliver on that is what I would say to Boris Johnson, because if you don't, there's a real problem coming in the 2024 general election.
Yeah. Final point to you, and then a quick final thought with my two panellists. Is it also strategically an attempt to leave open the door of accusing Labour of basically still being Remainers and maybe even wanting to sneak a new way back into the European Union?
There's certainly an issue of trust with Keir Starmer and some of his key allies because the way they behaved in the period 2016 to 2019. But Keir Starmer's got to get past that and own the opportunity that Brexit brings. The opportunity should mean the government should crack down, say, on P&O for its behaviour toward its own workers. That there's opportunity here to say, right, if Brexit is about sovereignty, which Peter will agree it is, then start using it. I go back to your point before I go about Boris Johnson and his longevity. Last October, he was talking about Boris rules for 10 years. In January, it was 10 weeks. And now it's probably maybe 3 years. I mean, it just seems it moves around so much. I think Partygate has not gone away. There was a focus group in Witney I had access to on Wednesday night, just 3 days ago. And they were saying, the people there, 6 people, Tories, Labour, Lib Dem, saying if he's found guilty or fined by the police, he should quit, but he won't quit. Those issues have not gone away.
Christopher, thank you so much for that. Final thought from you, because in fact you kind of nodded that point earlier and agreed with that. But am I completely wrong to think that refighting Brexit, even if it's the fine detail, as Hope just said, that I would consider that as being a drag? I would think there are other things to fight for.
I would be surprised if that is the central theme of the next election. The central theme should be, look what we've done with the freedoms that we've regained. Yeah. I mean, we started with the vaccine. That was the first opportunity we had as a result of Brexit that we wouldn't necessarily had we remained. But there should be lots more by then that we can point to.
And lower taxes and lower spending.
Yep, absolutely. And then contrast that with what would have happened if Starmer had got his way and reversed Brexit. But not just saying that they wouldn't have done it, we did do it. We've got to have done it and exploited the opportunities that it created.
Sure. There we have to draw the line. I'm so grateful. I didn't have time to come back to you for a final thought.
I forgive you.
Sure, I hope you'll come back. You come and join us again any time, Peter. Lovely to see you, and you're very, very welcome indeed. Thank you very much, Peter Lilly and Christopher Mayer, and before that, down the line, Christopher Hope from The Telegraph. We've 35 minutes to go. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends after the break. We'll be talking about the cost of living crisis. Many Britons will be listening intently to the Chancellor Rishi Sunak's spring statement next week. We'll be discussing what to expect in it with the Institute of Economic Affairs Director. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking fine and dry with plenty of sunshine, although it will be rather breezy. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and there will be plenty of sunshine around. Winds will be fairly strong along the English Channel coast, making it feel cool here, but elsewhere it will feel warm. Moving further east, and again there will be plenty of sunshine, but with the keen wind it will feel quite cool along the coasts. Across and into Wales, and it will be a pleasantly warm spring afternoon with plenty of sunshine. It will be breezy here too, especially over the hills. The Midlands and northwest England will also have a pleasant afternoon with plenty of sunshine. Despite it being only March, UV levels will be moderate this afternoon, so do take care in the sunshine. The breeze will be a bit more of a feature in northeast England, especially along the coast. If sheltered from the wind, though, it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine. Much of Scotland will have a sunny afternoon, and it will be very warm for this time of year in the west, perhaps reaching 20 degrees Celsius in the odd spot. Northern Ireland will also see plenty of spring sunshine this afternoon, with the warmest weather across the western half of the country. Eastern areas will be a little cooler thanks to the breeze. The fine and dry weather will continue into the evening, although it will remain rather breezy, especially in the south, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, where the time is just inching up to 1:30, so we've 30 minutes still to go of conversation, debate and discussion. Now, as I said a little earlier, we are just a couple of weeks away from facing the highest energy prices in living memory, a rise in national insurance payments and a freeze on the amount that we can earn before we pay higher income tax rates or even any income tax at all. On Wednesday, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, unveils his spring statement on the economy. Now, a handful of folks say he should stick to those higher taxes, get borrowing down, and drive cash into the NHS. Most that I speak to, however, say, hang on a minute, folk can't afford that. Let us give them a breather. And among them is my next guest, Mark Littlewood, the Director of the Institute of Economic Affairs. And I'm delighted to say he joins me live. Great to see you, Mark. I'll play devil's advocate slightly because COVID is raising its ugly head a little bit again. The country is massively, hugely in debt. The government does need more money, not less. Taxes have got to go up.
I think the problem with that, Alistair, is that we're basically at the taxable limit of the economy. I think there are very few taxes you could now pick up that would actually raise you much more revenue. In fact, the opposite might happen. Christopher Hope was talking on your show just a few minutes ago about how the overarching priority for the government should be growth, growth, growth. Putting up taxes, even if they raise you more revenue, and I'm sceptical that they would now, definitely dampen growth. And I'm looking forward to this spring statement, I have to say, Alistair, with a degree of unease and trepidation. I suspect taxes will be higher and spending will be higher when Rishi Sunak sits down compared to when he stands up. And that isn't a particularly good recipe for growth. So I'm rather worried about what we're going to hear.
Is it possible, is it just conceivable that he will say, look, in the short term, if we're going to try and help people who are facing double, treble energy bills, we do need to be drawing in that extra money to give it straight back to those people who need it most. And frankly, those like you and I who are lucky enough to earn a reasonable income, hey, what's wrong with us chipping out to help those who genuinely have no other options?
Yeah, but that's not really what we've heard trailed so far, Alistair, isn't really in that direction at all. I mean, there's some suggestion that there might be a reduction in VAT on overall fuel. That's very, very badly targeted indeed. When we talk of a cost of living crisis, and obviously energy bills, we're really going to feel the pinch over the course of the next coming months. But when we talk about the cost of living crisis, always worth bearing in mind, the biggest cost of living for virtually everybody is the tax they pay. And that's because spending is so extraordinarily high. An average person will be handing over perhaps as much as 35 or 40% of their total income in tax in one form or another, not just income tax, VAT and the rest. So we could look at the particular issue of energy bills. A big issue, no doubt about it. Energy is going to continue to rise and is a big cost for households already, and say, what do we do about that? But why not look at the fatter side of the ledger and say the cost of living of paying so much taxes is really the problem, and try and find some wizard ways of lowering taxes, perhaps particularly on those on modest, average or below average incomes. But we're not going to hear anything about that from Rishi Sunak, I think, on Wednesday. We might hear that's a long-term aspiration.
Yeah.
But I wish he'd put his long-term aspirations into short-term action.
Final point, and briefly, is do you believe that the cupboard-marked austerity is now finished? Because that a lot of folk, you and I both think it deep down, is that before you start taxing me more, how about spending a little bit less on some of the things that I'm not completely committed to?
Yeah, I'm a bit sceptical austerity ever happened, Alistair. Austerity means you're living well within your means, and the government's been running debts now for 20 years, living beyond our means. I was happy to accept that the COVID crisis meant that we were going to have to spend more money than usual, but that shouldn't be the new normal. So I'd like to hear from the Chancellor which areas of public spending he thinks he can reduce now, next year and the year after. But I fear my advice is going to fall on deaf ears.
I have a horrible feeling you're right, but tell you what, let's agree to talk again after the statement on Wednesday. But as always, a real pleasure, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. That's Mark Littlewood, the Director at the Institute of Economic Affairs. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've more still to come this afternoon in the final 25 minutes of the programme, looking into what is next for what was once a great British powerhouse, P&O, Peninsula and Orient. That is after 800 employees were sacked with no notice. But first, let's bring you up to date with the rest of the news headlines. Here's Simon.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 11:35. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The war in Ukraine has dominated the Conservative Party Spring Conference, with the Prime Minister saying Russia's president launched the invasion because he fears a free and democratic nation as his neighbour. Boris Johnson told the Tory faithful Vladimir Putin is panicking over the prospect of a revolution in Moscow.
He was frightened of Ukraine because in Ukraine they have a free press, and in Ukraine they have free elections. And with every year that Ukraine progressed, not always easily, towards freedom and democracy and open markets, he feared the Ukrainian example, and he feared the implicit reproach to himself. Because in Putin's Russia, you get jailed for 15 years just for calling an invasion an invasion. And if you stand against Putin in an election, you get poisoned.
In Ukraine, the prosecutor's office says 112 children have been killed since the start of the invasion. President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for face-to-face talks with his Russian counterpart, telling Vladimir Putin it's time for comprehensive and meaningful negotiations. In other news, 4 people on board a US military aircraft have died following a crash in northern Norway. The country's Joint Rescue Coordination Centre confirmed the Marine Corps aircraft was taking part in a NATO military exercise when it went missing. The government is being urged to publish the legal advice it received on whether P&O ferries broke the law when it sacked its staff. Labour is asking if there are legal moves ministers could take to reverse the decision. 800 employees were fired without consultation via a pre-recorded message on Thursday. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alastair Stewart and friends will be back in a short moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 20 to 2, and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. Fury continues over the video sackings of 800 loyal P&O workers, only to be replaced by cheap foreign labour. Some say that the actions broke UK employment law. Others that the Dubai-based multinational owners have shot themselves in the foot. Well, let's start the conversation off with Richard Woodman, who's an employment lawyer and partner at Royds with the King. Good of you to join us with the legal hat very firmly in place. It seems that the business secretary is pretty clear in his mind that they broke the law. Is he right, or is that just politics?
Oh, no, he's likely to be right. Some of the law around this sort of thing is a little bit complicated. For example, exactly where were all of the employees employed? In one establishment or in a variety of establishments in this jurisdiction or possibly in a different jurisdiction. So there's a little bit of complexity, but broadly speaking, it's likely that multiple employment laws have been breached and good practice certainly not followed at all.
But would that fundamental point that the TUC, to their great credit in this situation, have pointed out that if you're about to lose your job, you as an individual or your union collectively, if you're a member of a union, have the right to be warned and consulted. You can't just do it overnight unless you've gone broke.
They're absolutely right. Of course they are. This isn't the first example of an employer deciding to pay its way out of UK employment law. It happens. It happens quite regularly. City employers, that sort of thing. This is really probably one of the most egregious examples and the most brazen examples that you're going to find. It's hard to think of a similar one. Ultimately, if an employer wants to pay, then they maybe can turn a blind eye to the precise processes.
Well, when you say about paying, I mean, and certainly the owners in Dubai have attempted to sweeten the pill by offering much larger redundancy payments than was necessary. But in the reality that I think you're hinting at, and let me press you on it, I mean, they sit in Dubai, owned predominantly by a billionaire individual. They don't give a damn.
The human element of this process seems to have been completely disregarded. On the one hand, it looks like an employer who doesn't give a damn. On the other hand, you've got 800 people whose livelihoods have been ripped away from them at a moment's notice. Our employment laws are designed to prevent that happening. The sad reality is that if you are, as an employer, prepared to pay the bill, then you actually can do what has been done.
It's intriguing, isn't it? We're just, if people are listening on radio rather than watching on TV, we're just seeing a lineup of those beautiful ships. And I am reminded, as I tweeted last night, that P&O stands for Peninsula and Oriental Steamship Package Company. It goes back to the Victorian era. And laws were changed, quite rightly, to stop kids going up chimneys and doing dreadful things. But the government had the chance to say this fire and hire should not be acceptable. You're the one who used the language of morality as a lawyer, and I totally agree with you. But they didn't pass that law. I mean, Dubai are going to say, sorry, guys, we don't give a damn, but also we think we have acted appropriately.
Well, all the furore quite recently has been about fire and rehire. What about fire and no hire? At least if they'd have been offered new contracts, even on worse terms, it would have been a job. So, yeah, where morality kicks in to this type of situation is a question possibly for other people. But the laws are there to allow, as unions are saying, some pause for reflection, the provision of information, some feedback, some other views, and yes, to try and mitigate the impact of this appalling overnight decision on the livelihoods of ordinary people. Some of these people are employed in families, husband, wife, even maybe adult children. It's going to be a devastating blow. The laws are there, but unfortunately, as I said before, if you want to pay your way out of it, for the most part, you can. And I'm sure they've had very detailed legal advice. You only need to look at the video to hear how they're putting together a package designed to pay their way away from having to do what they don't want to do.
Yeah, even the choice of his language in the video was a bit of a giveaway, I thought. Final question to you.
Absolutely.
Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, Kwasi, we mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, the Business Secretary, but I was intrigued when I saw Grant Shapps saying, I'll tell you what I'd like to do in retaliation, and that is scrap all DP contracts for free ports, working in Felixstowe and the rest of it. Do you suppose they could do that legally as well?
Oh, well, that will depend on each and every contract, and you'll probably find that the termination or provisions in those would be extremely costly, simply to just rip away. Unfortunately, it just isn't as simple as that. What I suspect is that there'll be teams of just as good quality employment lawyers looking out on behalf of the unions and these employees for angles, and I'm not sure if anybody's thought too hard about the transfer of undertakings protection that might apply if all they're doing here is outsourcing these jobs to a third-party provider. Watch this space, Alistair.
We will do, but more importantly, you watch it, and then when you see something that happens important, you give us a bell, because that was so calmly helpful in explaining just what's going on out there, but also the legal as well as the moral dimension to it. Richard Woodman, great to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time this Saturday afternoon. That's Richard Woodman, who's an employment...
My pleasure.
employment lawyer and partner at Royds Withy King, and he will take up that request, I'm sure, to keep an eye on it. As I hinted in my conversation with Rish, it's not just about the law, it's about morality, it's about brand, it's about what's happened to UK industry, and therefore I'm very pleased to be joined by Jeff Ho, who's a good friend of this station, and he is the business and finance editor of The Express. Jeff, good to see you. Business, as well as the UK government, seem furious about this decision. I mean, UK business, I mean. But if you sell off the family silver, this is what you get.
Hello, Alistair. Absolutely correct. Unfortunately, this is the net result of years and years of British companies just simply putting shareholder value first without thinking of the wider ramifications and selling to the highest bidder. The good people in Dubai, quite frankly, will look at P&O as just a number on the spreadsheet.
Yeah. And I found it intriguing last night that P&O Cruises, now part of Carnival, were pumping out tweets left, right and centre saying, it's not us, it's the ferry division. I mean, there is a real sensitivity within what was the P&O group. They know that they've shot themselves in the foot.
Absolutely. This, quite frankly, is one of the biggest PR disasters I've ever seen. In fact, I think you may have to go back to Gerald Ratner to find something as done as appallingly as this. The simple fact is, given the disruption that passengers already endured before the announcement, and then the way that the video sackings were handled, and then you factor in the fact that you're importing basically much cheaper agency workers who may or may not be familiar, quite frankly, with the ships at all, and you have the makings of a PR disaster and a massive drop in passenger numbers.
In your experience, is it conceivable that the Dubai owners wouldn't have checked and double-checked on the legalities of what they have just announced by those video sackings? Because Richard was saying is if they've got it wrong, the TUC will employ absolutely top-class lawyers, so will the two trade unions involved in it. They couldn't have just shrugged, could they?
No, I would be very, very surprised if the UK management of P&O hadn't actually gone to at least another law firm in addition to the in-house counsel and their external advisors to be advised about this. Now, whether or not their ultimate shareholder in Dubai, DP World, was actually consulted and hired their own legal advisors on this is debatable, and I would suspect not.
It's intriguing, isn't it? Let me broaden it out a wee bit, because I know you think deeply about these matters as well. It's actually quite a tricky challenge for a kind of free market Tory government to get directly involved in what businesses are doing, even if they are foreign owned. And yet here you've got Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, saying, I reckon they've broken the law, and Grant Shapps, the transport secretary, saying, and they should have all of their contracts taken away from them. Pretty tough response from a Tory government.
Yes, and quite rightly so. Now, Kwarteng is probably on the more solid ground because, quite frankly, it does look like there is just cause to actually examine whether something has been broken legally. Whereas Shapps, on the other hand, that's an emotional response, as your previous guest alluded to. If he tried unilaterally to tear up these contracts, he would find that the provisions in them would be very costly to the government. What the government needs to do is strike the appropriate balance between being a welcoming, open economy, one that attracts investment. I mean, the flexible labour markets, Britain's shareholder-friendly laws are all part of that. But on the other hand, and maybe this is somewhere where, quite frankly, we need to be more like the French, we do actually need to properly enforce labour market laws and look after our own.
Yeah, I personally agree with that 100%. But I tell you the other thing that crossed my mind, one step back into Ukraine and sanctions against Russian business, taking them out of the international capital markets, sanctions against the oligarchs and what have you. the fact of the matter is that our friends in Dubai and Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, oil dollar territory generally, they own and control a heck of a lot more of UK PLC than ever of the Russians do.
Yes, they do control a lot more visible properties, whether it's companies, real estate. Yes, there's absolutely no way, I think, there'll ever be any sanctions against DP World or the Dubai owners over this.
Well, I understand. Final point is that when Johnson did his trip to Saudi Arabia and the Emirates to try and get energy, to get oil boosted so that, you know, that would take on the Russian challenge and what have you, he was therefore in the country that was about to sack 800 British workers, and either nobody told him or he didn't get round to telling anybody when he got back here.
That is probably correct, because on the day itself...
Which one's probably correct?
Oh, the fact that Johnson didn't know, because, quite frankly, it seems they managed to keep this, surprisingly, really under wraps, really tightly under wraps, because there wasn't a hint about this in government. No. There wasn't a hint about this in the media. Not even the unions had an idea. So this has probably been planned for a while. And the very fact, as you alluded to earlier, that P&O are offering enhanced terms means they knew it was going to be incredibly contentious, and that they probably have fallen on the wrong side of employment law.
Absolutely. Jeff Ho, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. So Richard first, the lawyer, Jeff, the business journalist, a nice rounded approach. As we all three of us agreed, this one ain't going away. So we'll keep in touch with that. I'm just literally got a couple of minutes before we go. Let's do some emails, can we? Yes, we can. Good. Start with Simon. Can Putin be trusted? That was the question that we asked at midday. That's a question that can only be answered with the word no. John says counterattack selectively while supply line is damaged seems to be a better bet, as they are doing in the southwest of Ukraine. Pausing just allows Putin to resupply. I think, John, that was Liz Truss's point in the article earlier on. We've another one here from Mark. The irony being the possibility that any peace deal may end up looking much like what could have been achieved without a single tank invading or bullet being fired. That's the tragedy. And that's Mark Seddon, incidentally, I know, because I remember reading it earlier on and suggesting it was a good one to share. Thanks, Mark. Alan then comes into the frame and says, Putin cannot be trusted under any circumstances. Ukraine will become Russia's new Afghanistan. Sanctions against China would lead to a slump, but it is a price worth paying. Interesting, from Alan. Nigel, Putin signed the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, agreeing to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. Why anyone would trust a word that he says now is beyond me. Nigel, thanks for reminding folk of that. That did crop up in our conversation with Peter Lilly and with Christopher Mayer. And I think that the most bitter aspect of that is that it was that Budapest Memorandum in 1994 that not only guaranteed the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine, but it was also the basis for Ukraine then surrendering its nuclear weapons and becoming a nuclear weapon-free zone. And the prize they get for that is Putin tearing up the treaty and soaring in. So 100% agree with Nigel. Have I got time for a couple more? I have. Good. David says, how can anyone believe that Russia wants peace while he is bombing civilians? There are unconfirmed reports that he has used a hypersonic missile. He might win the war, but he has lost the peace. Worse has shown just how weak Russia is. David, I think that's a really important point to which we will return. And again, amongst my guests, I thought one of the strongest points that they made, and I think the Prime Minister referred to it in his speech in Blackpool as well, business with Russia can never be the same come what may. What does that actually mean? And are we really seriously going to find alternative energy sources and still do net zero? That's one heck of a debate that we shall have here on this programme. And finally, let's have this one from Viv. Thank you. Viv says, can both sides be trusted? There should have been talks from the beginning. Boris should have gone over there instead of all the Russian welfare rhetoric. I don't want a war. In that, Viv, I think you speak for all of us, and I think let's hope it doesn't go to that. That's all we have time for today. Join me again tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Till then, a very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking fine and dry with plenty of sunshine, although it will be rather breezy. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and there will be plenty of sunshine around. Winds will be fairly strong along the English Channel coast, making it feel cool here, but elsewhere it will feel warm. Moving further east, and again there will be plenty of sunshine, but with the keen wind it will feel quite cool along the coasts. Across and into Wales, and it will be a pleasantly warm spring afternoon with plenty of sunshine. It will be breezy here too, especially over the hills. The Midlands and northwest England will also have a pleasant afternoon with plenty of sunshine. Despite it being only March, UV levels will be moderate this afternoon, so do take care in the sunshine. The breeze will be a bit more of a feature in northeast England, especially along the coast. If